you get fed up of having to be oh no, look, trust me, I don't, please don't be awkward about me. Like, I'll put you at ease. And it's kind of like, well, can't people put me at fucking ease? I know it goes both ways, but there have been times, and if you don't watch yourself, you can very easily find yourself falling into that trap. Hello and welcome to the Blindseyepodcast, the podcast discussing everything you did and didn't want to know about being blind. My name is Connor. This week I thought we would discuss using humour as an icebreaker when you have a disability. So in what settings you might use it, the positives and the negatives, because there are ups and downs to doing this, particularly in settings where you don't really know anybody or you're meeting people for the first time, or entering a room that goes quiet all of a sudden. But yeah, I thought it'd be worth getting into that and unpacking some of what's going on there. As always, if you enjoy the show, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, whatever it is that you're listening on with whatever device you have. Every little bit helps, and I would really appreciate it, and it helps the show out. Also, on this one, this is very much my own opinion. I've kind of dropped the disclaimers lately, but on this one, again, I kind of feel compelled to raise the idea that this is my own approach. These are my own thoughts to this, so I have no idea whether it's a blanket statement that can be made for everybody who has a vision impairment, but this is just me. Okay, so when it comes to using humour as an icebreaker, I mean, everybody uses humour as an icebreaker, no matter who you are, no matter what part of life you come from, or disability or no disability. But for me, it kind of developed in a situation, particularly when I first really lost my vision in school, but then more so after I left school, because you would enter rooms and things would go quiet, and the megalomaniac within me would sort of say, oh my God, everybody must be looking. I'm sticking out like a sore thumb, whatever that might be. So between that and, starting to go to parties, starting to go out, starting to socialize as an adult, all of this kind of came together where it was useful to be able to use humor in that kind of fashion. Now, when I say humor, I mean humor in reference to my disability. So, for example, if I was to enter a room where I only knew one or two people, and there was a load of strangers in there and everybody kind of went quiet, I'd come in and I'd kind of make a joke about finding a seat. So if somebody was helping me, they'd say, yep, there it is. And I would say maybe something along the lines of, oh, thank God I found it this time, wouldn't want to fall on my ass. Something along those lines, because it generates a bit of a laugh. It kind of shows, or I'm intending to show, that I'm not taking myself too seriously, because when you do have a disability, people can kind of walk on eggshells. They don't really know what to say. They don't know how to approach you. They don't know whether they need to treat you with gloves in their hands, and you're fragile, and what words will I use? Am I allowed to say, what have you watched lately? Do I have to say, listen? All these kinds of things. So it's kind of my own little weird way of making a point that I'm not particularly fussed. The funny thing, particularly about that example of, I hope I don't fall on my ass trying to sit down, is it's not actually true. In 18 years, I don't recall it ever happening to me. And that kind of will come onto what I'm going to talk about later. But it's just my way of showing I'm not taking myself too seriously in a situation where people might not know how to approach. And it also shows that I'm open. I'm open for conversation. As an other example of this, when I was at university, I was able to get around on my own. I was becoming much more mobile and independent in terms of getting around on my own. But I would find that I'd be surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of people my age, but nobody would really instigate a conversation with me. And I don't know if it was just because of the age we were, that everybody's a little bit socially awkward, or what it might have been. But I was trying to come up with ways where people would engage with me, because from my point of view, I can't walk into a room and say, oh, that person, I've been meaning to talk to that person, or something like that, and walk up to them and start a conversation. I can be sitting next to somebody and not even know it sometimes if they're quiet about it. So it was my way of kind of showing that I was approachable and open. And it kind of sounds lame to say now, but my best way of doing this was I got a customized shirt made up, and it just had written on it, "How about a blind date?" Just to kind of show that I wasn't taking myself too seriously, kind of addressing the elephant in the room, if that's a thing for some people. And it's just a good little starter, because people would often come up to me, particularly I used to go to university bar nights, and at the end of the night, once people had enough drink in them, they would come up to me at 11 o'clock or 11:30 and say, "I wanted to talk to you all night, but I didn't know what to say, but now I'm too drunk to care." And we'd talk for half an hour, and the night would close at 12. And I would say, just like, don't worry about it. Like, there's no, just come up to me. There's no issue. So I found that I was missing out in a lot of those situations because of that. So I was trying to be very obvious that I'm approachable and I don't take myself so seriously. Same again, I love bands. So I like band t-shirts. So I'd just get sort of provocative band t-shirts that might make somebody say, "Hey, what's that about?" Or, "Hey, I like that band," or "That's an interesting shirt," because it would get them to come to me in a situation where I couldn't go to them. And the main thing is, in many ways, a lot of this worked, but there is a downside. So again, it did work. It did help situations. It did help break that ice, but there is a downside to this. And I only realized it after I was already doing it and had instigated it. So the problem with doing this, and this is what I found, is that I kind of found myself stuck in a caricature of a role and who I was supposed to be. So if I entered a room or a social setting, my default was just being the funny blind guy that was spending all of his time putting everybody at ease. And after a while, you start thinking, like, there's more to me than this. But you're playing this role, which is useful and helpful in terms of breaking the ice, but then everything is about your blindness, when you know your entire life isn't about your blindness. So it's a real catch-22, because by me only making jokes about my blindness, it kind of gives off the impression that that's all there is to joke about. And then it becomes this weird feedback loop of, that's all I have to say, or that's all that's going on, which isn't the case. You can also end up being so open and approachable in a situation where you just become this educator. So instead of being a 20-something-year-old or a 30-something-year-old who's just out to meet new people and have good experiences, you end up being like an educational billboard for, "Hey, look, if you have any questions, please don't be shy to approach me." But then all you get is, "How do you do this? How do you do that?" And it's not that you have a problem with that, because you prefer somebody to ask rather than to assume or to be afraid, because I don't want people to be afraid and I don't want people to assume. But unfortunately, that person doesn't realize that this might be an ongoing thing. And that's where it's a catch-22, because on one hand, I'm kind of putting it out there that this is me and this is what I'm happy for you to talk about. But at the same time, it ends up being a situation where that's all I'm talking about when I don't want it to be. It's just that thing where you are more than your disability, but you just end up being the blind guy or the funny blind guy or something like that. And it's just a weird contradiction, because you want people to see past your disability, but your conversations, either instigated by yourself in some ways or by other people, just keep going back to like this one-dimensional conversation. So it's a hard one to manage and to juggle. And I guess for me, I always sort of felt this a little bit, but I really started to notice it with a couple of friendship groups where every time we'd see each other, the stories would just be the same thing. There'd be somebody at a party and somebody new would come in and we'd have a chat, and then it would be, oh, do you remember when Connor did this? Do you remember when Connor did that? And everything related to me in the story was the fact that it was so unexpected because I was blind, or this is how I did something because I was blind. And just everything became about being fucking blind. And I eventually kind of realized, like, this isn't really a friendship, because I just felt like a novelty. Like, I just felt like a weird guy in the corner who was sort of trotted out to be an amusement and an educational billboard for people who had some questions. But there really wasn't a lot else to it. As I said, it's just a catch-22, because if you don't put these people at ease, then you find your social circle or opportunities or your nights out limited and isolating. But there's this whole other part of you kind of going, why is it my job? Why is it my job for everybody to make everybody else feel comfortable around me? There's more than one of us here. And that's a really hard situation, because you get fed up of having to be the, oh, no, look, trust me, I don't, please don't be awkward about me. Like, I'll put you at ease. And it's kind of like, well, can't people put me at fucking ease? I know it goes both ways, but there have been times, and if you don't watch yourself, you can very easily find yourself falling into that trap where that's just what's happening. And then you realize you just have to cut these people off, because you're going out for a nice night. You're not going out to have that. On the flip side, I've experimented. I've tried going out and not doing this. And the conversation either doesn't happen, or things are much more awkward, or I'm sitting there on my own, or people are acting fragile or on tippy toes around me. So it's really hard to know what to do, because there's just not exactly a right, comfortable answer. I think as well, a lot of this is just about education. I mean, we do a piss poor job at educating people about people who are different in any kind of way. So for a lot of people, their first experience with somebody who's blind in any kind of educational capacity is meeting the person. So the person with the disability, or from a certain background, or from a certain country, they have to be this educator and wisdom giver, because our public discourse, governments, schools, whatever it might be, don't really teach a lot of this stuff. So it's like this weird novelty, and you end up having to play this role because nobody really knows anything. And again, you're happy for them to know, but you're also just trying to have a nice night. I guess the final thing I'd say is, this isn't a thing about shitting on people who don't know things, because there's plenty of stuff that I don't know and I'm curious about. But it's just that balance between those people who want to know, and then those other people where you're just this weird wisecrack novelty, and it's kind of unhealthy for everyone involved. And it's really contrasted, because when you do meet people who just don't care, like if you meet somebody and the first thing out of their mouth isn't something about, how do you do this, how do you do that, oh my god, this is so weird, I can't believe you're out, oh my god, you're so great, you're a little trooper because you're outdoors, and all this kind of stuff. If you meet somebody like that, who you're just a guy that happens to have a dog under his chair, or you're just a guy that has a cane in his hand, and there's no real airs or graces, like that's just a part of who you are. It's like you have blonde hair or sunglasses or a nice shirt. It's not some massive identifying feature. The relief you feel when you can just be a person and not some other thing going on. So, and that's, I guess, when you realize the difference, because for me, when I was constantly playing that role, I was always a bit uneasy about it, but I just thought that was how it was. That was how it had to be. And then you have instances where you meet somebody and they just don't care. They don't, like, the fact that you're blind just doesn't even matter to them. Like, they're not interested. They couldn't give a shit. And there's nothing nicer in this situation than a person who couldn't give a shit, even though it sounds counterintuitive, because you just feel normal. And normal can be overrated, but normal is what you want in many cases when you have felt abnormal for a long time. So, yeah, I hope that was interesting. Again, it's not meant to be a diss on anybody, but it's just how it is, and it's the positives and the negatives of this kind of setup and just the world as we know it at the moment and the education levels. So, as always, thank you for listening to the show. If you want to get in touch, you can email blindseyepodcast@gmail.com. That's BLINDSEYE podcast@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram if you search for Blindseye Podcast. I'm on Twitter @BlindseyePod. And if you just want one place to find everything, go to blindseyepodcast.com. And I will speak to you next week. Cheers.